Yes, folks, hello, welcome once again to Monetary Games and Collectibles. I'm Chris, this is my channel. Absolute pleasure to have you with me here today. And a couple of months back, I made this video here, a video about Marvel UK's comic book Action Force. I wanted to talk a little bit about the kind of UK experience, the UK connection to G.I. Joe and where it comes from, and the kind of whole Action Force context of all that. In fact, I'm wearing my Action Force t-shirt right now. It's something I reference a lot in my videos when I do my reviews. It kind of gives me a bit of a different perspective sometimes as to who my favourite characters are or why characters are popular with me and they're less popular in North America, these types of things. And just kind of show some of the differences and what was going on there. But while I was digging around in the old comic boxes, rooting about to find my old Action Force issues to use for that video, I happened across another comic title from Marvel UK that I kept that was another gem that had a huge impact on me. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to have a little chat about that today. So join me now, folks, for a 10-15 minute little slice of your day while I share with you an interesting title from back in the day, from the 80s, that a young Chris was reading, called Dragon's Claw. As I mentioned, folks, Dragon's Claw was a Marvel UK comic book. Doing my research for this and revisiting it years later, I realised that it only ran for about 10 issues. In fact, in my notes here, it only ran between 1988 and 1989, but it lives like super strong in my memory. As a kind of formative, influential comic book at the time. It was notable because of the size of the titles. You might remember from the Action Force video, the Action Force comic books and the Captain Britain comic books and the Transformer comic books were a larger scale, but these were of a more kind of US scale size kind of book, kind of title there. They were written by Simon Furman and drawn by Jeff Senior. Simon Furman, of course, had a big part to play in the newly written sections of Action Force and the newly written sections of Transformers that were made for UK audiences. And he was a kind of key part of that whole kind of creative sort of output at that time. The 10 issues were collected in a trade paperback edition that came out some number of years ago. Can't be that long ago because it's got the Marvel.com back thing on it. But let me read you the blurb off the back of this just to give you a sense of what Dragon's Claw was all about. The year is 8162 and the Earth is facing ecological disaster. The planet is moving ever closer to the sun, the seas are drying up, the animals are dying, and civil unrest runs rampant in the streets of every town and city. In order to distract the general public from the growing catastrophe, the World Development Council creates The Game, a gladiatorial contest between teams of warriors. Dragon's Claws, Dragon, Mercy, Digit, Scavenger, and Steel are the greatest game team in the world. The game, however, devolves into a violent free-for-all. Disgusted, Dragon's Claws drop out and the members go their separate ways. Yet, the team has always been greater than the sum of its parts, and it has always been believed that one day the world's greatest game team would reunite. Now, when the planet needs them the most, the Dragon's Claws are back. So it was a real mad title, folks. It was a real mad title. I had this sort of battle royale kind of game, and then that got cancelled, but the gangs that competed in the battle royale game were part of the civil unrest and running rampant, and this kind of core team, the Dragon's Claws, that were more honourable and more respected, more respectful, are brought back together to kind of help this World Development Council sort shit out. The comic book had a crazy, crazy dark tone. It was like a mad mashup of Star Wars, Mad Max, Blade Runner, He-Man, had a kind of He-Man-y vibe to it, a Visionaries vibe to it, and definitely was heavily inspired by 2000 AD as well, which was also being published in the UK at the time. And I have to say, rereading the trade paperback edition some number of years later as an adult made me go, fuck me, how did I even understand this when I was a kid? Do you know what I mean? I'm not quite sure how I grasped it, but, you know, it had great action scenes. The characters were wacky and colourful and balmy and out there, and as regular viewers around these parts know, balmy stuff appeals to me a great deal. So here you go. Here, for example, is Dragon. He's the leader of the team. After the game, he settles down, he gets married, he has a kid, he starts running a farm. But we're introduced in the very first issue to the fact that he can't quite let go of the thrill of the combat. and his honourable desire to defeat evil people. And so he kind of abandons his wife and kids, slaps on the old armour here, which, as you can see, that 2000 AD Mad Maxy style inspiration. It's like a mashup of Mad Max and the Rogue Trooper there. He throws on the gear and goes out to get the old team back together. Forever haunted, though, by the fact that he's that balance between kind of a normal life, a settled life. I say normal, but a settled life on the farm with his wife and his kids and his farmhand, and the thrill of the combat is just, you know, making him a divided character. Then we had Mercy, a kind of ninja, assassin, kind of vigilante style character. If I remember from the, you know, they've got like file card biographical information in the issues. She hunted down her father's murderer and ended up joining Dragon's team as kind of penance for killing the killer of her father. But obviously kind of Electra-inspired vibe there. Very big 80s hair, loving that, but a very typical kind of 80s female character design. Then you had Steel, just leaning into that kind of samurai warrior sort of trope thing, in a very 80s kind of style, you know, very honourable, master swordsman, had a Yakuza father or grandfather or something, you know, some sort of typical Yakuza connection, which is often the case with the Japanese characters, of course. Did a bit of interesting flirting with one of the villainous female characters, but he was kind of like the honourable heart at the centre of the team. A little bit more level-headed sometimes as well. Then we had Scavenger, who was, you know, a character that was a sort of tunnel ratty, grenadey, explosive dude who had, you know, his name's Scavenger. He had scavengery style habits. Again, the aesthetic look of that, got that kind of mashup, that kind of Mad Max, 2000 AD, Star Wars-y, 80s thing, all just jammed together. The dog there is called Scratch. Scratch, he finds Scratch in one of the earlier issues and adopts him and takes him on board as his little animal companion. But another great character with an awesome character design. And then the final member of the team was Digit, who was the sort of team techie guy. Fulfilled all the sort of tech stuff, did all the computery bits, hacked electronic doors, broke into computer systems, turned off alarm systems, all those kind of good techie team member things to do. That big backpack that you can just sort of see over his back had sort of weapons that, you know, tased enemies and had like gas things, you know, but his eyes are cyborg and he's got this kind of implant thing that you can plug his brain in. Just again, very 80s style design. Love it. One of the key things about the title was the covers. Just so eye-catching on the shelf, you know what I mean? Just the same way as the Action Force covers were so iconic, the Dragon's Claw covers were equally as iconic. So let's have a quick way through some of the kind of covers here to give you a sense of, you know, a young lad, comic book reader in the 80s, looking at the newsagent's shelf, you know, how this wouldn't catch your eye and draw your attention in. But also, equally, just notice some of the wacky villain designs. That there is Slaughterhouse, the leader of the Evil Dead, which is a whole gathering of kind of classic kind of 80s gothy horror-style characters, obviously leaning heavily into a kind of vampire, heavy metal, Evil Dead kind of thing there, which is really awesome. That issue 4 there, again, villains-wise, antagonists-wise, they go out to France and they go to Paris, and there's a whole kind of modern-day night thing going on, which is really cool, really awesome. Again, how could that not catch your eye on the shelf and make you want to pick it up? Some more covers here. This is particularly another notable element was the crossover with Death's Head, which was another Marvel UK title. Death's Head obviously went on to kind of cross over into the mainstream and become a character that was written and utilized in the American version of Marvel Comics. But here he is in one of his very early appearances in Marvel UK with a kind of crossover event between the Dragon's Claw and the Death's Head title itself. Another mad design. This is the Doctor, the agent of Nurse. I'll maybe try and find a scan or a picky of the matron from Nurse. So one of the things, there was this whole kind of mystery storyline lying underneath about the kind of nefarious intentions of the government officials that they were working for, and whether the missions that were being sent on were legitimately missions that were there to help settle the civil unrest and to combat problems and issues that are taking place across the World Development Council's purview, or whether they were in fact being sent for other nefarious reasons. I won't spoil it in case you ever read it. The trade paperback edition is quite widely available, but look at that mad design. How can you not pick that up? How can you not see that? How can you see that on the shelf of your newsagent and not pick that up? And it follows that same kind of design language that was really consistent across Marvel UK as well. Lots of the Transformers covers, lots of the Action Force covers had these same kind of design language to them, same aesthetic, with things like speech bubbles as well, which I know was an American tradition as well. But it just really spoke to you as a reader, as an audience member. And there you go, there's issue 9 and 10. Look at that wonderful painted artwork there for issue 10, which happened to be the last issue with an unfinished story. It never concluded. It got wrapped up, and even though there was kind of a bit of a kind of superficial conclusion to the story arc that was taking place at the time, the wider story never quite got settled. Which, you know, is a thing it was acceptable to do in the 80s. Acceptable in the 80s. It just kind of ended with them all stood in a very typically 80s action pose, saying, you know, dragon's claws will fight on, and, you know, they never did. Oh, incidentally, just going back a couple of images in my slide deck, meant to mention this issue 7 here. That cover artist is a guest cover artist. It's Dave Gibbons, who, of course, many of you will know when he crossed over into the American marketplace. He's famous for The Watchmen. He's famous for that Superman storyline, for The Man Who's Got Everything, and now has a huge mainstream, bibliography under his name of comic books by DC, by Marvel, etc., etc. You know, and this is where he started out, in places like Marvel UK in 2000 AD here in the United Kingdom. Now, years later, in hindsight, and not to throw shade at Simon Furman, I love his work, like I said before, hugely influential on me. But it does come across as a bit kind of 80s cheesy now, in a reread years later. The collected trade paperback is really awesome. If it's a space that you'd be interested in exploring. And they've also reprinted in a lot of this I'm looking down here, flicking through it now, just getting drawn in. A lot like the original file cards and stuff that appeared in the OG issues from the 80s. But I've got to say, Jeff Senior's artwork is absolute fire. I love his artwork. There's just something about it. The character designs, I know I've banged on about the character designs, just really appealed to me, and I still find them appealing now. That whole sort of post-apocalyptic 2000 AD, mashed up with Star Wars, mashed up with Mad Max, mashed up with all sorts of there's a He-Man kind of vibe to it, 80s heavy metal, all this stuff just crammed in, really appealing. And Jeff Senior just leans into it and does incredible artwork, which hopefully you're gathering from the little peek at the covers I've shown you, or anything I decide to edit in over the top there. So yeah, go check it out. I would highly recommend it. It's a momentary video distraction. Again, it's not really a history of Dragon's Claw or a deep dive into Dragon's Claw. It's just sharing something of the UK comic book readers' experience of our generation, your contemporaries, my North American audience, your contemporaries in the UK, and kind of what shaped our perspective and kind of shaped our interests, that has obviously carried on with us through the 90s and through the noughties and into the modern day. So there you go. Any questions about it, ask me in the comments down below. Happy to address those. But yeah, just wanted to do a kind of follow-on video to the Action Force one to say, here's another little interesting insight to the world of being a UK comic book reader in the 80s, So if this is something you're interested in and you'd like me to do more on this topic, then let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, thanks for coming and hanging out. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, do all the usual YouTubey stuff. Hit that button, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But all that remains to say is have yourselves a great day, have yourselves a great week, and swing back around again for another video sometime soon, folks. All right? Take it easy.